All right, this video is going to discuss the proper usage and citation of textual evidence. We're going to seek to answer the question, how can we avoid plagiarizing in our writing? Let's begin. Just a reminder about the seriousness of plagiarism. It is the theft of someone else's ideas and claiming them as your own. Don't forget the consequences outlined in our student handbook, as well as our class syllabus regarding what happens if or when we decide to plagiarize. Now, sometimes plagiarism is accidental, so this video today is going to help us avoid that kind of accidental plagiarism in our writing. Something that's easy to remember is if you did not think of it and it's not common knowledge, you always have to cite it. So let's think of an example here. This is an example of information that is not common knowledge. Now, information that is common knowledge might be something like the sky is blue, or during the year 2017, the President of the United States is Donald Trump. So that information we should expect most people to know. However, this quote here, scientists have found that featherless chicken makes as much protein as the feathered chicken. I didn't know that until I read this information. It's not common knowledge, so we have to cite where we got this information. So how exactly do we cite? You can see that I took this quote word for word from a text, therefore I placed quotation marks around it. Immediately following the quotation mark, I have a parentheses, and then the author's last name, which is Smith, space 43 indicates the page number of the text in which I found that information. And then I end the citation with another parentheses, and then notice the period is outside the parentheses. It's important to remember that punctuation always goes outside of the parentheses whenever we're citing, unless there is an exclamation point or a question mark in this quotation. In that case, if this was a question, I would put the question mark after chicken, and I would still maintain that period outside of the parentheses there. So I'd have two types of punctuation. Now, no comma should ever appear in the citation, nor should there be a period at the end of the citation, only outside the parentheses. Again, when we're talking about citing information, we're talking about our concrete details in our paragraphs. If your own ideas are present, you don't need to cite that information. That's your idea. You're the author. So in your commentary, there's no need for citations, only concrete details. Whenever we're citing someone else's idea in their exact words, we have to make sure that we're putting them in quotation marks. And again, cite the sources we did before. So here's another example. Later, the author wrote, comma, quote, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. End quote, parentheses, Rowling 2, end parentheses, period. So again, author's last name, page number, punctuation outside the quotation. Whenever we're using an author's idea, but we're not using their information word for word like we did in that previous example, this is called paraphrasing. It's really important that whenever we choose to paraphrase, that we rearrange the words in our own format, okay? You don't want to just move a couple words around. It needs to sound and look different, but maintain the same information. And again, you should always be citing the source, even if you're putting it in your own words, okay? Because it's still not your idea. Now, paraphrasing is a harder skill than direct citation. So maybe we're not quite ready to paraphrase yet, and that's okay, but hopefully at some point this school year, you're going to get there. A side note about citing an author, if you're writing an essay and that you're only using one author throughout the entire essay, once you've mentioned the author once, you don't have to do so again. So rather than putting in parentheses, author's last name, page number each time, you would simply put parentheses, page number. Now, if you're using multiple authors in an essay, you would have to make sure that you would put the author's last name in the parentheses every single time you cite, so that way the reader knows who is saying what information. Whenever you want to alter parts of the quote and you want to maybe skip over certain parts because it's a little bit too long for your preference, you can use something called ellipsis. Sometimes we think of these as the ... dots. In our text messages, they're used for a different purpose to kind of show our trailing off of thought, but in our formal essays and our quotations, we use them to show omission. So what I mean by omission is that where I have the ellipsis in this quote means that I actually eliminated words from the text. Now notice when I read this that it's still a cohesive sentence that makes sense. Quote, Harry Styles was the best of them all. dot, dot, dot. His new hit song, dot, 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 has been playing on the radio all week. Okay, I still cite it with quotation marks, parentheses, author's last name, page number. And I also want you to know about the format and structure of the ellipsis, or the dot, dot, dot. Note that there's not 4 dots or 2 dots, there's exactly 3. And notice that there's no space between the words that it's centered between. So that's important in terms of our formatting. You have to make sure you follow that exactly. Whenever you want to replace a pronoun like he or she in a sentence and indicate who they're referring to make it more clear to the reader, you can do so by eliminating the pronoun and replacing it with the name in brackets. So here's an example. Quote, One Direction consisted of several band members. Harry Styles was the best of them all, end quote, citation. So notice here in the original text, it must have said he was the best of them all, not Harry Styles. But the author wanted to be clear to the reader that Harry Styles is the band member they're referring to, so they place his name in brackets and eliminate the he. You can do the same whenever you want to make sure you're being clear as to whom you're referring to. All right, last note here. Whenever we want to cite a longer text and we don't want to use ellipsis to shorten it, if it's 4 lines or longer, we have to cite it differently than we normally do. So here's an example from Harry Potter. This is the citation here. This is the direct quote from a chapter in the book. We introduce the quote with a colon rather than a parentheses or other types of punctuation, so you always use the colon to introduce it. Notice there's no quotation marks around this block quotation, okay? Also notice that the period comes at the end of the quote, then you have the parentheses, page number, parentheses, okay? This is because it's a little bit different. It's the opposite of what we normally do. Normally we have the period on the outside, but it's just a little bit different. So whenever you have longer texts, period comes first and then the citation, and then directly beneath that you continue writing. Also notice that the quote is indented within the paragraph, so it's a little bit further to the right beneath the writing of the author. All right, that's all for today. Thanks for watching.